Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a story that, honestly, it got under my skin. It's one of those stories that burns bright for a moment and then, well, it almost vanishes. Picture this. November 2005. A really cold winter night. The kind where the wind just bites. You know, somewhere quiet, rural India.
Okay.
And in that quiet, a young man, Shanmugam Manjunath, is sitting in his car. He's about to become a name tied forever to India's fight against corruption.
But a name that many people might not even recognize today, right? That's the crux of it.
Exactly. He wasn't some big shot politician or a celebrity. He was an officer, Indian Oil Corporation. And he was murdered brutally for doing his job. It's a tragedy, but it's a mystery in some ways and a stark reminder.
It really is. And that's what we're diving into. This isn't just about one man's life, tragically cut short. It's about a critical point in, well, India's struggle with corruption. We're looking at the real cost of integrity. What happens when one person stands up?
All right, what's the price? So our mission today, understand Manjunath, who he was, what drove him, but also the system he fought against, the details of what happened that night and what his story tells us about, truth, memory, and maybe forgetting. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So Shanmugam Manjunath, he was young, just 27, an officer at Indian Oil. Now, you might think, okay, government job, probably pretty stable, maybe a bit boring.
Yeah, that's the typical image, isn't it? Comfortable.
But the research we looked at, it paints a totally different picture. It actually described his role as, get this, more dangerous than walking into a war zone.
Wow. Okay. That definitely grabs your attention.
It does. What made this specific job, this seemingly, bureaucratic post, so incredibly risky?
Well, the core issue he was dealing with was fuel adulteration. And this was rampant, especially in the northern towns and villages he was covering.
Fuel adulteration. Can you break that down a bit? What exactly are we talking about?
Sure. It sounds technical, but it's pretty straightforwardly criminal. Basically, mixing petrol or diesel with cheaper stuff like kerosene or solvents, sometimes even used oils. Anything to stretch the volume and boost profits.
Okay, so they're creating this kind of dodgy cocktail fuel.
Exactly. A lethal cocktail, often. It was cheap for them to make, incredibly profitable, and completely illegal, obviously. The margins were huge compared to selling legitimate fuel.
Right, so the motivation is purely money.
Purely money. But the impact, that's where it gets really serious. It wasn't just a financial scam. It hit ordinary people hard. Customers were cheated, paying full price for garbage fuel.
And it damaged their vehicles too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It poisoned engines. Think about it. Farmers with their tractors, delivery drivers, families on scooters.
Yeah.
These vehicles are their lifelines in many areas.
Yeah, crucial.
So this adulterated fuel caused breakdowns, massive repair bills, even potentially dangerous engine failures. Manjunath wasn't just ticking boxes, he was fighting something that directly harmed people's safety and livelihoods.
And he wasn't just sitting behind a desk. The sources say he was actively out there, inspected pumps, suspended licenses, and shut down businesses. He was really taking the fight to them.
He was. He was directly disrupting their illegal income. You can imagine that kind of direct action. Well, it doesn't win you many friends in that kind of business.
No kidding. It makes him sound incredibly dedicated, but also incredibly exposed.
And that leads right into the system he was up against. It wasn't just a few rogue pump owners acting alone. No, the reports talk about a chain of corruption. It stretched beyond the pumps. It often involved local politicians, maybe police, sometimes even higher up the chain.
Wow. So a whole network.
Pretty much. A network protected by powerful figures who were getting a cut. Think about police looking the other way or politicians making sure penalties just disappeared. It created this shield around the whole operation.
So Manjunath wasn't just fighting individual criminals. He was pushing against this entire corrupt ecosystem.
Exactly. And disrupting one part of it threatened the whole thing. That's why it was so dangerous. He wasn't just a nuisance. He was a genuine threat to their whole setup.
And he knew it, didn't he? The sources mention emails to friends where he said the fight was exhausting.
Yeah, you can feel the weight of it, not just physically tiring, but mentally, emotionally draining, constantly pushing against this wall of corruption.
He knew he was stepping on dangerous toes.
That feels like a massive understatement now.
It really does.
And then there's that detail that it gives you chills. He apparently joked to a friend, sort of half seriously, that if anything happened to him, they should at least make sure his story wasn't forgotten.
Oof, that's heavy. Almost like a premonition.
Right. It shows he was aware, maybe scared, but also really wanted his stand to mean something. It kind of sets up why we're even talking about him today.
Absolutely. And it raises that question, what kind of conviction does it take to keep going when you know the risks, when you feel that exhaustion, that isolation? Because he likely was isolated.
Well, when the system itself is compromised, when the people who should be backing you up might be part of the problem, an honest officer becomes an outsider, a threat. He probably had very little real support.
So every inspection, every suspension was a lonely act of courage, really.
It seems that way. His persistence, despite everything, points to this incredible inner strength, this deep-seated belief in doing the right thing, whatever the cost.
And that belief, that unwavering commitment, led him to that night, November 19th, 2005. Gola Gokaranath in Lakhimpur Kheri, Uttar Pradesh. Just a small town.
Yeah, the setting makes the violence even more jarring.
What was the immediate trigger? Why was he targeted right then, right there?
The records are pretty clear on this. Just a few weeks before, Manjunath had ordered the sealing of a petrol pump right there in Gola. It belonged to a local businessman, Pawan Kumar Mittal.
And Mittal's pump had been caught selling adulterated fuel.
Correct. Caught red-handed. So Manjunath shut him down. And that closure, well, it cost Mittal money. A lot of money, given how profitable this stuff was.
And pride, too, probably. Status.
Definitely. As the source material puts it, in towns like these, money is power, and power is defended at any cost. Manjunath directly challenged Mittal's money and his power. He became a target.
Okay, so the motive seems pretty clear. But then there's this fuzziness about why Manjunath was even in Gola that night. He was supposed to be going somewhere else, right?
That's right. He was heading to Bareilly, apparently.
Right.
Why he stopped in Gola, well, that's where it gets murky.
What are the theories?
Some reports suggest maybe he decided on a surprise inspection. Typical Manjunath, always vigilant.
Okay, that fits his character.
Others suggest he might have been going to meet someone he thought he could trust, perhaps. Which, if true, is even more chilling. It suggests a trap.
A trap. Wow, so we just don't know for sure.
The precise reason remains unclear. And that ambiguity itself is telling, isn't it? It highlights just how vulnerable he was. Operating in an environment where trust was a luxury, maybe a fatal one.
Yeah, it underscores the danger. Every move he made could have been walking into something unknown.
That uncertainty, whether it was just him doing his dangerous job or if he was actively lured there, it really paints a picture of the tightrope he was walking. Visible enough to do his job, but trying to be elusive enough to stay safe.
A tightrope that finally snapped that night.
It seems so. The accounts of what happened next are brutal.
Describe it. What do we know about the actual attack?
Sometime after 9 p.m., shots fired. Not just one or two. 6 bullets.
6. In his car.
In his car. The quiet night suddenly shattered. Just sheer, overwhelming violence. There was no doubt about the intent. It was an execution.
God, that's horrific, just imagining that scene. The suddenness, the brutality.
And it didn't stop at the shooting. The aftermath was just as cold-blooded. They didn't just leave him there.
What did they do?
They dragged his body out of the driver's seat, put it back into the car, probably the back seat, and drove the car away.
Trying to hide it. Hide him.
Exactly. The plan seems to have been complete erasure. Hide the evidence, make him disappear like he never existed. Erase him, as one source put it, like an inconvenient note scribbled in the margins of a larger, darker ledger.
It's chilling. It wasn't just murder. It was an attempt to obliterate his memory, his stand. A message.
A terrifying message to anyone else who might think of challenging them.
But they didn't succeed in erasing him completely, did they?
No. Despite their efforts, the car was found later, abandoned near a remote village, his body still inside, cold. One description mentioned his face looked still as if caught mid-thought.
Oh, man. That detail. So the discovery blew their plan.
It did. It turned a hidden crime into a public horror. Finding him like that, discarded. It spoke volumes about their callousness, how little his life meant to them when it got in the way of profit.
It really brings you back to that question, doesn't it? The value of a human life versus profit. For them, he was just...
Oh, and the sources suggest exactly that. He was just a problem to be removed. Complete dehumanization. Not a person, not a son, not an idealist, just an obstacle on a balance sheet.
It's profoundly disturbing, that level of contempt.
It is, and it highlights the kind of enemy he was up against.
Yeah.
Ruthless.
When the news broke, how did Indian Oil react? His colleagues?
Initially, disbelief. Then grief, naturally. But that quickly turned to anger. You can imagine the shockwaves going through the organization, losing one of their own like that.
Especially someone so dedicated, presumably well-regarded.
Right. And for his colleagues, the ones who knew him, it was more than losing a friend. It felt like, as the material says, the murder of the very idea that honesty could survive in that kind of decayed system.
Wow. So his death attacked the very possibility of integrity.
In a way, yes. He represented that possibility that one person could stand firm, could resist. His murder was a brutal message that maybe you couldn't. Maybe integrity wasn't safe.
That's a heavy burden for his colleagues to carry. A chilling message to anyone else trying to do the right thing?
Absolutely. It's a blow to morale, a blow to the hope that things can change without such terrible costs.
Did the story get much attention nationally at first?
It did, for a little while. There was a brief surge. Newspapers ran his picture. TV news talked about the young idealist cut down in his prime. Politicians made statements, promising action, protecting whistleblowers.
The usual cycle, maybe. Outraged promises.
Sort of. There was genuine shock and sorrow, it seems. His name was suddenly everywhere, a symbol of tragic heroism. It felt like maybe, just maybe, this would spark real change.
But it didn't last.
And that's the really uncomfortable part. No, it didn't last. India, collectively.
Why?
It started to forget.
Why? How does that happen?
It's complex, but partly it's just the nature of news cycles, public attention. Weeks pass, other stories break. The reports mention it specifically. Cricket scores, celebrity weddings, election rallies. Life swallowed the tragedy whole.
The sheer volume of life just moves on.
Exactly. And maybe it's also that systemic problems like deep-rooted corruption, they're hard to stay focused on. They're uncomfortable, complex, not easily fixed. People disengage.
So the initial shock fades, and the difficult reality underneath just sinks back below the surface.
Pretty much. It shows how fragile public momentum can be for these kinds of issues. The status quo has a way of reasserting itself once the initial emotion dies down.
Which brings us back to that heartbreaking irony, doesn't it? His half-joking plea to be remembered.
It really does. He was remembered intensely for a short while, and then the forgetting started.
So what does that say for people who do take a stand? Is the biggest risk not just the violence, but being forgotten afterwards?
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the silence, the erasure, can be almost as devastating as the act itself. The death of memory, the fading of the potential impact.
And the legal process didn't exactly help keep the memory alive, I gather?
No. The wheels of justice grind slowly, as they say. The trial dragged on, which is common, especially with powerful defendants, but it dilutes the immediacy, the public focus.
Was there eventually a conviction?
Yes, eventually. 6 men, including the pump owner, Pawan Kumar Mittal, were convicted. They got life sentences initially, which felt like justice, albeit delayed.
But there's a catch.
There is. The notes mention that appeals later reduced some of those sentences.
So not quite the definitive statement it seemed at first.
Exactly. It highlights that justice often comes late and in pieces, especially in complex cases within the Indian system. By the time the final appeals were settled, years had passed.
And the nation had moved on.
Largely, yes. His name, his story, wasn't really in the public square anymore. The legal process, while necessary, paradoxically contributed to the forgetting. The momentum was lost.
Still, despite the forgetting, despite the imperfect justice, his death wasn't entirely meaningless, right? It did spark something.
It did. Maybe not a wildfire, but definitely sparks. Some tangible things came out of it.
Like what?
Well, Indian Oil named its anti-adulteration drive after him. Symbolically important, keeping his name attached to the very cause he died for.
Okay, that's something.
And the Manjunath Shanmugam Trust was set up. Its whole purpose is to support whistleblowers, promote integrity. That's a concrete legacy, trying to help others who take similar risks.
Providing actual support, that's crucial.
Absolutely. And then there's the impact in education. Some professors started telling his story in ethics classes, teaching future professionals about his courage. That could have a long ripple effect.
Seeding the idea in the next generation.
Hopefully. But maybe the most profound impact was on those who knew him or knew of him within the system.
How so?
For them, it wasn't just losing Manjunath. It was, and this is a powerful quote from the material, about the killing of the possibility that doing the right thing could keep you safe.
Ooh, that hits hard. It shatters the illusion that just being good is enough protection.
Precisely. His death became this terrifying case study, a warning that the principled path could be fatal. It creates fear, encourages silence, which sadly allows corruption to continue. It's a win for the corrupt, in a way.
Yeah, a chilling effect. The material also talks about how his story isn't the kind of heroism India typically celebrates. What does it mean by that?
It makes the point that We often prefer heroes who are alive, victorious, celebrated, the triumphant narrative. Manjunath's story isn't that. It's tragic. His heroism is defined by sacrifice, not by a happy ending.
It forces you to confront something uncomfortable.
Exactly. And it highlights the nature of his heroism. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet, persistent.
How does the material describe it?
It says his was the kind of heroism that shows up every single day, refusing to sign off on something wrong, refusing to look the other way, refusing to be bought. That steady, daily grind of integrity.
The courage of consistency.
Yes, in the face of constant pressure and temptation, often when no one is even watching. That kind of quiet refusal to compromise, that's often the biggest threat to a corrupt system.
And the kind of heroism that, as the notes bluntly state, in this country can get you killed.
That's the brutal reality. His life and death are a stark reminder that just being honest can be an act of rebellion with fatal consequences in some environments. A single, incorruptible person can be seen as more dangerous than anything else.
And that refusal cost him everything.
It did.
So what's the situation like today, nearly 2 decades later, in Lakhimpur Kheri? Is he remembered there?
Well, the reports suggest that life goes on. The petrol pumps are still open late. The rhythm of commerce continues.
But is there any marker, any memorial?
Apparently not. No plaques, no statues, no street names, just an absence. No physical reminder of the man or his sacrifice.
Just absence. That feels incredibly poignant, an invisible void.
It really is. It speaks to how easily even profound sacrifices can fade from public view, especially when they represent uncomfortable truths. The silence itself feels significant, almost deliberate.
Like a collective shrug.
But as the material concludes, for those who do remember, that absence is loud. It carries a message.
What message?
It speaks about how truth-tellers are often treated. Brief applause, then a long, heavy silence. It forces us to think about what we as a society truly value. How do we honor integrity, especially when it comes at such a high cost? Do we remember, or do we choose to forget?
That's the core of it, isn't it? Manjunath's story is it's heartbreaking, infuriating, but also weirdly inspiring. It shows the terrible cost of fighting corruption, how easily honesty can be silenced by profit and power.
His dedication, his quiet refusal to bend, it's unforgettable once you know the story. But his death underscores the lonely, dangerous path truth-tellers often walk.
And as we wrap up, here's a thought to leave you with. Right now, somewhere else in India, maybe another young officer is facing a similar choice. That moment of decision. Look the other way, take the easy path. Or stand firm like Manjunath did. Maybe they've heard his story, maybe they haven't.
But if they choose to stand firm, they need to know the reality. Manjunath's story tells us this path is dangerous. So the question for all of us maybe is, what stands out to you about these individual choices against overwhelming corruption? And how does our society remember or forget those who make that stand?
It's a question that definitely stays with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope Manjunath's story prompts some reflection, not just on him, but on the value we place on integrity, especially when it demands the ultimate sacrifice.